How exciting. Down on Earth doing earthly things.
We are. So welcome, Christina. I'm so excited to have you here on officially my second episode of Awakening in Real Time on the Awaken Inspired YouTube page. Um, I'm so excited that you're here with me. I'm going to introduce you first. We have a lot to talk about today. Um, for those of you who don't know Krystina Shea Benson, also known as the Quantum Healing Coach. She has a very engaged and large following on Instagram. Happened pretty quickly, I think, for you in the last year and a half. You've become probably the go-to expert, I would say, on everything that we're going through energetically right now, the impacts of solar flares and Schumann resonance on us, and the impact of all of the changes that are happening in our bodies and fields as we're going through this shift. And you've really been a trusted resource for so many people. So first of all, thank you for that.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so Krystina is a soul embodiment guide. She is a seer, a channel, an oracle, an energy worker. She has a really unique set of skills, but she also has an awakening story, just like all of us do. So the first thing I think I want to say before we move into this is we've all been there. We've all been on the before we understood the world as we do now. Some of you who are listening to this might still be in the kind of uncertainty and on the in the I know there's something going on. I can't quite put my finger on it. Things are getting weird. Synchronicities are happening. I don't know what's happening to my body, my relationships, my career, all the things. So we've all been there and we've all had different stages of awakening and or reawakening. And so we're going to talk a little bit about your journey too, Christina, because I think it's really important for all of us to be sharing our experiences. Many of us didn't come in with this understanding and knowledge. So it's really important that we are here for all the others that are. Um, so I'm going to turn it over to you now. First of all, can you just explain a little bit to those that don't know you about you, how you work, what it is you do now, and then I'm going to take you back into the journey a little bit.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. This is exciting. And I'm so excited to be part of your launch as you share everything that you do and open up all these amazing stories. Um, yeah, so right now I am just on the precipice of launching workshops and a community, and I'm excited about that because my goal is and always has been, as I've been shown by my soul and source, to teach people how to embody their true selves, their soul essence, and get all these old icky programs out of the way that we've been conditioned with in this reality through the pyramid systems that we're in. So I am in the process of launching my first self-mastery system workshop program, which will teach people how to master themselves and engage with their soul. And then if they choose to do that, the next class will be a certification. And I'm launching a community because something I've found that is really a big problem or a painful area for people is loneliness. And I know I dealt with that for so long. And so I really want to, it brings me to tears thinking about it. I really want to bring people together and have that unity so that we can find one another. It's always shown to me that we're placed around the globe like lights on a Christmas tree. If you put all the lights in one area of a Christmas tree and you only light up that one part, it kind of looks a little silly. But we were intentionally placed all around the tree, so we would light up the entire Christmas tree. But because of that, oftentimes people feel alone. So the community does launch also in April, and I'm excited for that.
And
And
that's called the Quantum Healing Collective.
the Quantum Collective. Yep, the Quantum Collective with Krystina Shea. And yeah, we'll be meeting once a week and I do a little bit of talking, but it's more about answering questions and getting people to know one another and creating a place and a sacred space where they can talk and
Yeah,
have
and
chat.
that's going to be on Patreon, correct?
Yep, the community will meet on Patreon. That's where the Zoom links and such will be accessible. And there'll be multiple tiered prices, so based on what they can afford. And then I'm also creating a private chat space, either I think on Telegram is what I'm looking at, so where they
Okay.
can have one another to talk to and reach out around the globe, because I literally meet people from all over the world with my one-on-one sessions, which I still do on occasion, but I'm slowly phasing out of.
Yes. Okay. Talk to me a little bit about the focus of, what really has built your audience to be so large and engaged on Instagram is you're really truth telling and showing up in a very authentic way. And as you're moving through the symptoms and signs and shifts that we're moving through right now, you're up there just sort of sharing it and talking about it, which is amazing. So, can you talk to us a little bit about um, kind of what's going on and how you see it energetically?
Yeah, so we are in a primary solar cycle. So we have solar cycles about every 11 years. And what's cool about the sun is a lot of people don't realize this, but our sun then connects to the primary galactic sun, which is the source of all energy. So the energy that's coming through our sun is coming off of those solar flares, and those are the photons or the particles, but they're also codes that is basically turning on our dormant DNA strands. And what's happening is the sun sends out those solar flares, the earth absorbs them, and as she absorbs them, she is also upgrading her genetic levels, DNA codes. And as she's doing that, the Schumann resonance fluctuates. So what I specifically report on my page is both the solar flare activity and or the Schumann resonance, because it's been going on for about, it happens every 11 years, but we've been in this cycle pretty heavily for a little over a year now. And so I'm constantly sharing what's happening, because when this happens, when we either get the solar flares or we have a heightened Schumann resonance, what happens is people have physical symptoms. They can feel fatigued, they can feel exhausted, they can have all sorts of body aches and pains, basically wherever they're storing energy in their body and in their physical template. Their body's going to go through a release and a purge response, which then creates what's called a Herxing or Herxheimer response, which gives a person flu-like symptoms. And or they can feel completely disengaged out of their body. They can have all sorts of emotions come up, whichever it is. That's actually the awakening process as their codes are being rewritten. So
And to some degree, you could call that an ascension symptom, because I think a lot
ascension
of people
symptom.
call, and it's like, oh, it's an ascension symptom. Well, all
Yeah.
of this is, a growth or an ascension type of symptom.
Yeah, exactly. Because everybody talks about the ascension, but you seldom hear people talk about how and why it's happening. Well, how it's happening is with the sun and with the Schumann resonance assisting our bodies in going through this process. So, what I do is I help people understand what's happening. So, a lot of people who find my page, they're like, what is this? At first, it might be like, what is this woman talking about? But how does she know my symptoms? And then
Yeah.
once you start to understand that I'm talking about the ascension, which I do mention sometimes, but I intentionally try to avoid those types of words all of the time, because I don't want to put off people who would think it's cuckoo. I want them to understand what is happening for them and then lead them down the road of deeper understanding of why it's happening. So I basically use my page to explain what's happening to them, and then I put in longer videos on occasion to break down the emotions, because the emotional process is really hard. I've seen people end up in psychiatric wards. I've seen people end up in the hospital with all sorts of problems, needing antidepressants and that kind of thing. So I really do my best to try to explain to them what's happening, why it's happening, and then eventually, hopefully, they want to come in and learn about how they can do this
Right.
easier for themselves, because this is the greatest leap in our species.
This is the Great Awakening.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is really why, this series anyway is so important to talk about right now. As many know my journey, my awakening process in 2017-18 was very fast, aggressive, and really scary.
Yeah.
Um, so the fact that there are people like you out there, the work that I'm doing, so many others that are helping to guide people through this so that they don't have a psychotic break and that they don't sort of, make decisions when they're supposed to be in the in-between or supposed to be healing. There's help now. There's help now from people like you and what you're doing. So very grateful for all of that. So speaking a little bit about that, this being the Great Awakening, there are many, many people that are also reawakening, or people who are going through yet another cycle of awakening, which, you and I are no different. So maybe could you talk a little bit about, what you might be experiencing if you're kind of going through a reawakening or another, you know, um, uh, quick sort of evolutionary time, and maybe talk a little bit about how to integrate that a little?
Yeah, sure. So I like to use the word remembering because I feel like it's the soul just remembering. And as the soul remembers within the human goes through the purging process. And yeah, as we begin to remember, I think the biggest first sign that might happen for most people is they begin to question their reality. Nothing makes any sense. It's like, it's as if you feel like you're walking in some type of dream world and nothing here makes any sense, but then you don't have anything to compare it to. So you just walk around feeling a little bit off. And then as that happens, there's a certain disassociation that happens within a person because they're taking a step back. It's like their soul is guiding them to take a step back from the 3D reality for the purpose of inner reflection. And then when the inner reflection begins, oftentimes people go through what I call the dark night of the soul, and that's actually a commonly coined term.
Yeah.
And for everybody can have, you can either have multiple dark nights of the soul, whether they're mini ones, or you can have a
I
long.
can tell you I've had a laundry list.
Yeah, exactly. And
There's been
they're,
a lot of dark nights of the soul.
yeah, and they're scary and you can feel lost because the soul is waking up within the body and nothing here is making any sense. And as that's happening, the person is feeling all of the emotions come up from current life experiences, ancestors, past lives, whatever it is. And, you know, I like to say that we have to go into the dark to find our light. So while the dark night of the soul can be extremely scary and overwhelming, and oftentimes that's when people end up in the hospital or seeing a psychiatrist or something, it is a necessary part of the process for most people because that's where they find their inner light. And ultimately, it's when we find that inner light that we begin to light up the world around us. And basically, this whole ascension process is lights turning on everywhere, right? And that's what it's really all about.
And with that too, I mean, you talked about isolation, but there's a lot, and I think it's interesting to bring this up now. We're at this time of recording, we're in March of 2025. So we're in a spring, you know, for those of us on this side of the world. And with spring comes deaths and rebirths. And this process of remembering or awakening is all about deaths and rebirth. And so maybe talk a little bit, if you could, about some of the deaths and rebirths maybe that you've experienced or that you can share that, you know, based on your, you know, your work and the people that you've worked with. What does this look like for people? How does it show up in their lives? It's pretty dramatic and drastic. So you'll pretty much know when you're going through this, but if you could share a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can share a little bit from my own personal story. You know, for the most part in my life, I was pretty connected to my abilities. I grew up in a home where being psychic was kind of normal. We had psychic Sundays. We would go to church in the morning and have psychic Sundays in the evening. So I always kind of had my abilities. I was always connected to source and that kind of thing, and the angels and talking to animals and such. But around in 2018, my I lost my mother, and my mother and I, she was the closest person in my life. So the version of me that I was with her in my life died. And, you know, that makes it sound so small, but losing my mother was to me losing everything. She was the primary person in my life. Now I'm okay because it's years later and I actually see her in the astral realm
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
okay. But when I lost her then, I pretty much I had a meltdown. I had a breakdown because I didn't know how to be here. So that was my death. That was the death of Krystina up until 2018, which was about 45 or so years of my life. And yeah, so that when as that aspect of me died, I had to be reborn and discover who I was. And it was hard. I mean, it was I was in bed for about 6 months, very, very sick. And then it took me about 2 years to get back up on my feet. And if I'm honest, I'd say that I'm still discovering who I am without who I was in that relationship. But a death and a rebirth is a necessary part of the process for every area of our lives, especially as we go through this, because we have to lose a certain part of ourselves in order to be reborn into who we truly are. And what I find interesting in my sessions is that these are often soul contracted experiences. So,
Right.
in other words, my mom and I had a contract where she would die at that very time to prompt my awakening just before 2020, right?
Right.
Because 2020 was when I really began to
And
awaken.
ironic, that's the same year I started. It was
Yeah,
2018, and that's when mine wasn't sort of a catalyst event like yours was, a death, a breakup of a relationship. Mine was like at the tail end of like probably 6, 7 years of deaths that happened. And then that's when my abilities came online. Um,
yeah,
Seemingly
yeah,
nowhere, but we're looking back that 6, 7 year time period with all of the ending of my marriage, the ending of my business partner, the ending of my world as I understood it financially, like all of the things, all of the deaths. And
yeah.
you've had a similar experience as well, letting go of the old.
Oh yeah, definitely. And we have to. I was going to say, oh, I wanted to add something I think is kind of important for any viewers who might be curious about their own. I have noticed, and I wonder if you have too, I have noticed in sessions that there are particular years that seem to be coincide with people and be activating
Yep.
or years of death. And it's been 2001, 2008, sometimes 2012,
Mm.
2015, 2017 or 18, and then 2020. So if
Yep.
any viewers are listening and they've had marked events in those years of their lives, that's an indication that you've also been experiencing soul contracts that are designed to awaken you for whatever it is you're here to do.
Yeah, and it could be events to sort of happening as a collective, or a collective whole, or a collective small group. It could be, I mean, births even. I mean, there are so many things that can kind of anchor you into that next part, and that's definitely a good sign for sure. I've seen a lot of people. I'd add 2021 and 22 now to that mix, and the whole, 5 years ago at this time, what we were moving through, that was a huge collective catalyst
Yeah.
to a lot of us really coming out of it, out of the haze.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, 2020 for me was that was when and I think we're a little bit different in this way where I grew up aware of my abilities, aware of all that. And I had already been kind of using them. I worked as a corrective exercise specialist, and when I would place my hands on people, I could see what was going on in their body. And I did some energy work and some guided meditation type stuff. But it wasn't until 2020 when by then my own personal life where I was very, I guess you could say I was in very kind of sheltered in a way where my life was my family, my home. That was it. I didn't really look beyond that into politics or what was happening on worldly stages. I was just doing my own thing. And 2020, when I had no more family and my world was very small and I was sitting at home glued to the TV and I was like, what is actually happening? That is when I began to question things. And I was like, why am I here? What is happening? And that was when I began to be flooded with the truth about human trafficking and the satanic cults and all of that other stuff. And then that for me led to another await death and rebirth because when I learned the depths of the human trafficking and the adrenochrome and all of the stuff that happens in our world, and then it goes into the galactic realms as well. When I began to learn all of that, I pretty much I had a meltdown. I had a breakdown.
I did too.
Because I
Yeah.
couldn't understand how the cruelty of it. And it took me, I would say, from 2020 until 2022. So it took me like 2 years to really be able to live in this world, understand the depths of the evil, and then be okay with um, living here and then finding my purpose again because I remember thinking, well, what's the point? What's
Yeah.
the point? Right? And so it took me that long to really be okay with saying, well, we've got to do something. And then
Yeah.
when I started to be activated, and I'll never forget it, one day I was walking in my backyard and I was barefoot. I often would be barefoot outside. I'm grounding often. And so I was barefoot and it was like my soul was in my body and my legs were going like this. And it's
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
was walking on air and I was going through an activation, which I didn't know what that was yet. So that started my DNA activations was in 2022. And that was when I started to receive my purpose for why I'm here. And, it slowly started to happen.
Let's
But that was,
let's
that
talk
was,
about that activation phase, or the activation, because I don't think a lot of people really understand what that is. Likely many that are going to be listening right now have had some sort of activation stage.
yeah,
Uh, you go through, you tend to go through, I would say pockets of time where there's like a lot of activations. Usually comes after you've had a pocket of time of a lot of revelations or a lot of like understandings like about the world. Also, typically, I think the whole healing or integrating and grieving process of what the world really was that you had no idea. That's that. Again, I slept and cried the entirety of 2018.
Horrible. I
And
was suicidal then.
yeah, it took me 2 years. So I was ready for 2020 because I'd already heard about all of, or understood, not heard. There was nowhere really to find this information, which is also very scary.
Yeah.
Um, along with coming into my gifts at the same time, which I had no idea what these were. So you can be, if you did have sort of some, like you did, like some spiritual background, or at least you kind of know what's going on. But when you're coming to it, and I always say now there's no hall pass to our awakening at this point in this 2025 where we're sitting here. There's no delaying it anymore. We're on the train. It's going that way. And so you might as well understand and know what these things are. And so activations can look like a whole lot of different things, like that feeling of being out of body. It can look like extensive dreams that are very real and understand. It can look like a quickening of synchronicities. It can look like real physical, real. I mean, I think you've had a lot of really physical activations
Yeah.
where you felt them. It could be, body pain, illnesses. Um, yeah, but this kind of like being here, but realizing you're not really here and feeling really disassociated. A lot of these activations, again, if you don't know what's happening, if you don't know what's going on, they, can lead to psychic breaks and other things that are really not great. And, I think you and I are, on the exact same page about this. And this is why we're talking about awakening and remembering what this process looks like.
Mhm.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure you've spoken with, I'm sure you've worked with many, many clients, and I'm sure many of them, I don't even know that any one can't have this kind of some semblance of this experience, even if they've been awake all their lives.
Yeah. No, you mean what I've been through or what yeah.
Well, we've been through it, and many others right now are going through this exact thing that we're speaking about. And
Yeah.
our words are going to meet them and they're going to be, holy, this is what's happening to me, for me.
Yeah,
For
for me, right? Yeah. Activations are very, very intense. And I just want to offer too, before I share a little bit about my story, that what I have seen is, for example, when Alicia and I went through our activations, it was probably over a longer period of time. It's as if what I'm being shown is that those of us who are intended to be guides or teachers for anybody who's going through this process now, we had a little bit longer time to do it. And it makes sense because the energies that were coming in from the sun weren't as high of a frequency or a vibration that we're receiving now. So the energies we're receiving now are so intense that people are going through this in a much more quickened state, right? So it's almost like a quickening. So we had maybe 2 years or whatever we had, but some people I'm seeing now are having this happen in months.
yeah.
And because of that, it can seriously lead to a breakdown. So just know, to anybody out there, if you are really struggling, if you are really hurting, you want to definitely reach out, either her, myself, or reach out to somebody that feels right for you. And I want to offer to you that there are more people out there who are aware of this. And just a quick little story: a woman I worked with about a year or so ago, before I met her, she had gone through such a quickened state of awakening. She had a massive Kundalini awakening, and we can talk about that if you want, because Kundalini is what this is really all about. She had a massive Kundalini awakening. And when that happened, the energy, basically what happens is the energy accesses different caverns of the brain, and then the brain turns on all of a sudden, and you're remembering stuff and you're feeling stuff, and nothing makes any sense, and it can feel like a psychotic break. So her husband took her to the ER. And in the ER, they were there for like 8 hours, ran all these tests. All these psychiatrists came in. They all told her there's nothing physically wrong with you. You're just basically losing your mind, et cetera, et cetera. And luckily, what happened for this woman, and this is happening, so there's people all around the globe in all walks of professions, doctors,
Yeah.
psychiatrists. I've actually worked with in session people who are psychiatrists and doctors. They come to me to understand what's happening. And lawyers. So I can tell you that people in high professions are aware of this. So it's important that you trust your guidance. So this woman was at the ER, and again, she was told there was something wrong with her mentally, whatever. All of a sudden everybody left, and another doctor came in, and he pulled her to the side, and he said, well, he said, I think what you're having is a Kundalini awakening. And he,
Doctor
like, what
said
are you
that?
talking about? So then this doctor, he said, come in this closet. He actually pulled her into a broom closet, her and her husband, and he explained to her what was happening inside of her body based on, because Kundalini, it's an actual physical process. So
Yeah.
he explained to her what was happening inside of her body so that she could understand. And then he gave her some references. I think it was a
This
shaman
is a doctor that said this?
in the ER. Yep, in Los
Amazing.
Angeles. Yeah, so there are people in all walks of, there are people who are politics. There are people in all walks of life who are aware of this. Spirit is in everything. It's not just in the it doesn't just mean a person has tie-dye behind them or they're wearing a bunch of crystals that they're spiritual. Spirit is in everything. God is in everything. And so, trust your process, trust what you're led to, but know that if all of a sudden nothing makes any sense, you're going through an awakening. Um, for me, it was a little bit different because, like I said, I already had such a deep connection to source. I mean, when I was a little girl, I used to talk directly to God, and I know that might sound weird for some people. I would go outside and talk to trees and talk to animals. I still talk to trees and talk to animals because there's spirit in everything. And it was just normal for me. I would go into meditations and go into astral realms as a teenager. This
But
is
as children, we come in without these belief systems, programs, you at least had, a familiarity of spirit and source, and it wasn't normal, but most of us shut it all down.
Yeah. Yeah, I was lucky. My soul, for whatever reason, well, I know why. My soul chose my mom, who was a former hippie, and
Mm.
she was very open. I mean, she's, like I said, we did the church thing in the mornings, but then we had a shaman come over to the house on Sunday evenings, and then we did our guided meditations and all sorts of cool stuff. And we were doing energy healings when I was 16. I was working with a pendulum when I was 12. I was like, is time
Wow.
asked me to the dance? And I was using
Oh
my,
my God.
it was just normal for me. But all of that said, I had learned how to live in the world being who I was, and kind of, it was almost like I always had a secret identity. That's how I was for most of my life, and I'd gotten comfortable with that, I guess. Although it wasn't always fun because, for example, when I was a corrective exercise or personal trainer, people couldn't understand why I just knew what was wrong with them or what to do for them. And I couldn't really say anything. So it was a little weird, but I was okay with that. When I went through after 2020 and I started to have my activations, because for those of us who are whatever we're here to do, I started to receive the energies from the sun or my DNA turning on sooner. And that's what this is all about. Humans are having their actual DNA restored to its proper sequencing. And we do actually have 24 chromosomes. So as the 24th chromosome is being prepared to be turned on, we're going through these mini surges of activations. And so when I started to go through that, and my abilities started to turn on, for me, the way my abilities work, and just so you guys know, every single human is an antenna for energy, for God, source, creator, whatever words you want to call it. It's just vocabulary made up by humans, ironically. But each and every one of us is an antenna. And we all have all of the clairs and then some. We all work a little bit differently. I say it's kind of like having a model car. So depending on what model car you have, you might have power windows, or you might have a moon roof, you might have a stereo system, whatever it is. But for my model car and for my body, I feel energy, I hear it, I see it. My biggest ability, I would say, is it's as if I'm constantly walking in between worlds. So my mind and my consciousness, I always have a screen playing in my mind of other things. Like when I look at somebody, I can see multiple screens around them, and I'm able to see deeper truths around us. So that's why I call myself a seer or an oracle. I'm able to just see right into somebody's body or energy field, or see right into what's going on around us. And it's amazing, but it took me a long time to get used to.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, I only had just some of those abilities that you're explaining, those few days, where I was, you know, in the hospital or before the hospital, and it was terrifying. And, I can't imagine living with that all the time. I remember being able to like see who was light and who was dark in that time. And I didn't even know what that meant at the time. I remember being able to hear what people were thinking. I mean, these kinds of things, when you haven't lived in that, that's why these activations are, ooh, they can really, they can really get you.
Yeah, they really, really can. And yeah, for me, the seeing was the big thing. One day, and the way it works, and just for anybody who doesn't know, the way activations work, you'll get an activation, and it takes 3 days for the quantum biology to work into your body. So you go through an activation, and the symptoms or the experience lasts for about 3 days, and then into the fourth day, it starts to integrate into your body, and then you can have a little bit of a lull. So if you ever notice when we're going through these energies, there's a 3 day sequencing that pattern that happens. And so for me, I remember the first biggest real activation I had. I walked outside, or I woke up one morning and everything felt a little bit different. And I walked outside and I was looking at the trees, and I lived on a big property in Connecticut. And I was looking at the trees and whatever, and I was seeing the scalar waves of colors. Now, most people know about the chakras, or if you don't, the chakras are the energy centers in the body, and there's each a specific color. Well, they connect to the scalar waves. So around you, even though you can't see it, there are waves of energy. Just think of like almost like rainbows going through everything around you, with more colors than what we actually see in rainbows, because those are just the colors that are visible with our eyes. But there are more colors than that. And these waves of energy, these are waves of light that hold sacred geometrical patterns inside of them that are codes. So that's how this reality works, right? Basically, energy has slowed down enough so that we can be matter in these bodies. But all around us are these waves of energy, this light that is then basically pushed or moved by sound frequencies. So it's light and sound. So for days, I walked around and I was able to see these waves of energy moving through bodies, moving through trees, moving through the air. It was pretty trippy. I mean, I always used to say, and I say this jokingly, so I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I used to drink and party a lot when I was in my 20s.
Yeah,
I
I
had
think
some
many will have that in
fun.
common with you.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I had a lot of fun. So I always joke and say that, it's a good thing I drank and did as many drugs as I did, because it was like it prepared me for what I was going to go through later. Because I walked around feeling high as a kite, seeing everything as if it was waves of energy for days. And if I hadn't had all that practice in my 20s, I don't know that I would have been able to handle it. But yeah, so that lasted for about 3 days, and that was pretty cool. And that was amazing. And a lot of what I do, because a lot of what I do is about teaching people how to embody their souls, I have part of my role is to understand this stuff. And I remember saying to my guides at one point, listen, if you want me to do this work, because they kept telling me I'm an energy healer. And I was like, if you want me to do this work, then you got to show me the receipts, because I want to know how stuff works. So, well, they did. So that happened one day. And then there was another time I was going through an insomnia bout, which is another common experience we can all have, right? Where we just can't sleep because our mind is reconfiguring, and the endocrine system, your pituitary and your pineal and your thyroid are all being shifted. And as that happens, your hormones get disrupted and you go through sleep disruption patterns. And so I was sitting on the edge of my bed one night at like 3 a.m., not able to sleep. And I was just staring at the wall. I was exhausted, but I couldn't fall asleep. And there was a bureau right in front of me, just a little tiny bureau. And I remember just looking at the bureau, and all of a sudden it swirled out of its pattern. So it went into the reverse Fibonacci sequence and went out of its pattern and then back in, and then out and then in. So I was seeing it unform and then form, and I was seeing the atomic structures. And so I was like, whoa, this is cool. And then all of a sudden I started receiving all of this channeled information, and I have it written somewhere. It's like, I don't know, 10 pages long of this channeled information. A blue being actually came. I think it was I call them the blueprinters. They're kind of like they wrote the code for this living experience. They're these giant blue beings, and came and showed me how it all works, basically how matter is formed, how subatomic particles are slowed down to create life, to create physical, biological experiences for a soul to be able to experience life through. And then how the densificated, the different densities of things, the different densities of, not dimensions, but actual densities, because there's dimensions and then there's densities within the dimensions, and how it works. I was shown how cancer happens. I was shown how, what autoimmune diseases are, how illness happens. I was able to see and understand how all of this works. And yeah, that was a big integration as well.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of why, like I have, sometimes it's difficult for me to put into words all of what I'm able to see, because there's no words for it, right?
Yeah.
Because humans, that's why I always joke and say humans create vocabulary. So unless there's a word made for it, we don't have a word for it. So, and especially English is the worst language, because we're so limited in our expressions of what we can actually say. And I don't know any other languages other than energy. So I'm always constantly working to translate what I receive from energy into the verbiage that we have. But that was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a
Yeah,
lot of translating is going on with a lot of people like us, and we might not all describe it the same. um but I kind of say there's always multiple ways to get to a similar result. So some may describe the things that you're describing in another way, but yet we're all still kind of talking about the same thing. We're talking about energy. We're talking about the fact that we are what, 99% made up of energy, 1% of matter ish.
everything's energy. Yeah.
Thing is energy.
Even matter is energy.
There's just so much to relearn because, I don't know, but I certainly didn't get taught any of these things in school. I
Right.
also get taught many life skills that I could have really used after, but that's a whole other story, which we'll have you back and we'll definitely be talking about that. But maybe for those, it's 1:44 right now as I looked at the clock. Of course it is.
Mm.
Um, yeah. For those of you, I would like you to talk about what actually is a Kundalini awakening or activation or the experience, and how you would know you're in one.
Okay, yeah. So Kundalini is energy. I mean, that's what, when we're talking about Kundalini, it's energy. I think a lot of people associate it with sexual energy, and it isn't necessarily, although it can feel like it. It can feel very intense. So what happens is when we reach a certain level, or when our soul, I always say when the soul decides, because it's up to the soul. It says, all right, my human is ready. And then I always say it's like there's a knock on the door and you just feel a little bit different, but you're not sure why. What happens is there's this energy that begins to rise from our sacral area, right? Rises up through the spine. And as this energy rises up, it has to go through the 33 vertebrae, which is where that number with Jesus comes from, right? So it rises up through the spine as it's activating the different nerves in the spine. So it starts here, goes up through the spine, it activates the different nerves in the spine. So as you're going through that, keeping in mind that, and this gets into the beautiful work of Louise L. Hay, how
Mm.
every area of the body holds and stores specific emotions. So as the Kundalini is rising, that energy is going to trip those emotions. So for some people who maybe have been doing work for a long time, for example, and they're emotionally aware and they're okay and they're fully in their understanding of who they are, this can be a pretty comfortable or enjoyable experience, right? For somebody who is not, for somebody who is like going to a 9 to 5, raising 2.5 kids, working their butt off, and they have no idea what's happening, and they have a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, as this energy begins to rise, it will activate all of that stored trauma in their bodies, whether it's theirs, whether it's their ancestors, whatever it is. And when that happens, the person will go through an emotional, basically kind of like breakdown. They don't even understand what's happening, but they're bursting into tears, or they're angry, or they're happy, or they're euphoric, or whatever it is. So they have to go through that process, and that can be scary. But what's ultimately the goal is that energy rises up through the spine and it accesses the brain. And now the base of our brain, we have the limbic system, right? Right at the base of your skull, at the top of your spine, you have the limbic system. also known as the amygdala, or the reptilian portion of the brain. And this gets into some deep conversations because, yes, in fact, there are reptilian beings. But guys, we have to remember that we also all carry reptilian genetic coding inside of us. We're from the same genetic material. We have 23 other chromosomes, or 22 other chromosomes, but part of each of us is reptilian. That's where your fight, flight, freeze response comes from. That's that survival instinct that we all have. So as the Kundalini rises up the spine and then accesses the base of the brain, and the purpose is to go beyond it and get into the brain to access the colostrum for the purpose of turning on the Christ consciousness portion of the brain, which I'll talk about at the end because that's super important. As it's working through that limbic portion of the brain where you stored all of your trauma, that's where your body really stores how to respond to certain experiences. That's where you start to shake, or you have a complete fear response, or you fight, or you run away, or whatever it is. That's all coming from that area of the brain. So when the energy accesses that portion of the brain, if the person is not aware of what's happening, of how it's happening, of if they don't have the support around them, this can be very, very scary.
Yeah.
And that's when we have the breakdowns. I actually know someone
So
who's
would you say too then that I think I might, we have reawakenings and moments of integration, and but could a Kundalini experience happen over maybe a couple of months? With, I mean, that's kind of
absolutely,
what I feel like maybe you and I have been going through the last couple of months. It's
absolutely.
more of a, it's like this, and it keeps coming, and then you're down, and then you're up, and then you're down, and it's just like waves, 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 waves.
Yeah, well, we're constant as we're raising in frequency. So getting back to the energies that I talked about, that I see those beautiful scalar waves of energies all around us, the bandwidth of those waves is widening as we're receiving higher consciousness energetic codes from the sun. So as we are raising in frequency, we're having to raise in oscillation. Frequency is the bandwidth, is the level of which you are, the expansion of which you are. But then there's the oscillation of the atoms. So as the atoms are oscillating faster, yes, we're actually increasing our energy. So there's a constant energetic flow of this Kundalini energy moving through the body. And every single time, yeah, we go through another
And
activation.
it would also explain why, when you're going through this activated Kundalini or awakening or stage of awakening, you will find that you don't resonate as much with the people that you did before. And it gets really difficult because, I mean, these people could be people you work with, they could be friends of yours, they could be family members, and it can feel like even your home can feel very like dense, or you know like dirty almost. Sometimes you can feel like your own body is, really, and that would explain why, because you're kind of moving up in frequency and down, and
Yeah,
and
well, as this energy is rising in you, what's happening is all of the programs that you've taken on. So you think that you're supposed to be like this or act like this or whatever it is, all those programs that you've taken on are shedding, and they're going away. So the people around you are not going to be in alignment with who you truly are, because you're shifting beyond them. And that's why this process can be uncomfortable and lead to lots of loneliness for people. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, the Kundalini, it's a process. And then the end goal is, and I have a picture I'll have to show you from my phone. I think it's really cool to explain how I see things. What happens is, once this Kundalini goes past the limbic portion of the brain and then enters into the center of the brain, and it begins to activate specific glands, what happens is the brain, it functions in a more harmonious state, because our brain is actually constantly, our entire nervous system is our brain actually, but being more specific with the Christed consciousness, because that's the whole goal of this. Christ came and planted the seed, we're here to sow it. And so as this Kundalini works its way into the brain, what happens is the brain begins to send out a more harmonious signal with who the person truly is. And
Mm.
as that happens, I'm just looking for a quick picture here to show you. As that happens, the brain sends out these sound waves of harmonious energy, and then we become harmonious with our environment.
Yeah.
right? Rather than just having what I call splat energy. And this is the best picture. This is a picture I found on the internet years ago that I think best describes or shows what I see. So, and these aren't the right colors. The colors always change, but you can see how the energy moves through the body. So the
Yeah.
goal is to reach a state where we are in harmony with the energies around us. And when we've reached that state, that's the Christed consciousness state, right? Jesus was the man, Yeshua was the man, but he was able to access the Christed consciousness. The Christed consciousness is actually sound waves, and it's not spelled CHRI, it's KRY, and it's these specific sound waves that are around us that when we're able to be in harmony with, we are in a flow state. And then our soul, who is also a sound wave, I call it our soul's chords, right? All of the universe is one verse. Everything is a song, and each of our souls is a chord in the universe. We're each part of the symphony. And as we are harmonious with the sound waves, then our soul, the musical chord of who we are, can more harmoniously integrate into this world. And your life becomes in a flow state where things just begin to align for you. Ultimately, people you call manifestation. And there's a lot
Yes.
of BS out there about
Being
manifestation.
yeah, there's a lot of BS, or being in the zone. And yeah, getting there is there again. I always say no hall pass. So every single part, so if some,
Yes.
you've really got to have your discernment hat on with working with any teachers or coaches or healers even. It's really, really important. Okay, so I'm going to have you back because there's just so many things to talk about. But where can everybody find you?
Primarily right now on Instagram, the Quantum Healing Coach on Instagram. I do have a YouTube channel as well. I don't put as much on there. I'm working on it. I've been really busy in one-to-one sessions for the last year or so. And yeah, you can also email me at thequantumhealingcoach@gmail.com.
And there's also your Patreon page coming very soon.
Yes, 4/4 will be the launch date. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. I will put that in the show notes too. Thank you so much, Christina, my dear friend. I'm very grateful for you, and I'm sure this audience is going to be grateful for this too. So I'm definitely going to have you back.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And guys, just take care of yourselves.
Please do. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.